thank you for joining us today. My name is Yuka Yoneda, and I will be your host and moderator for this session. Our topic today is no-cost KYC, how to update your 2022 onboarding roadmap. Let's get started with a few speaker introductions. So first we have Tim Brown with us today. Tim is our head of product here at Prove. He is a well-respected expert in biometrics, authentication, and identity. He was most recently chief technologist at IDEMIA, and he also holds patents in the areas of authentication, biometric liveness, and identity authentication. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, you may know her from her many appearances on Bloomberg, Forbes, BBC News, NPR, and others. Marianne Miller is the Fraud and Cybercrime Executive Advisor here at Prove. Before that, she was head of fraud strategy at Vero Bank. She's also held roles with USAA, PayPal, as well as the Secure Payments Task Force with the Federal Reserve. Thank you so much for being here, Marianne. And for those of us on the call who may not be familiar with Prove, would you like to give us a quick overview on the next slide?
I'd love to do that, Yuka, and it's great to be here with everyone today. And at Prove, we provide a modern way for businesses to enable their customers to prove their identity with just a phone. And we offer phone-centric solutions that enable our customers to acquire new customers and engage with their existing customers by removing friction while keeping the strength of security and enhancing customer choice. Our solutions are used very broadly among 1,000 businesses across diversified industries, over 500 banks, 3 of the top retail companies, 3 of the top 5 retail companies, 2 of the 2 major healthcare companies, and 6 of the 10 insurance companies in the US. We're also gaining traction in the crypto market and other emerging markets in fintech as well. So our businesses around identity proofing is growing.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Okay, so let's set some groundwork for the audience today about some of the identity proofing and KYC challenges that companies may be facing today on the next slide. So Marianne, you are the former head of fraud strategy at a leading fintech. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences there?
Yeah. So broadly, Yuka, what during the period of time when I was definitely leading the head of fraud at a fintech, it was during the same time that the pandemic occurred. So during that time, ironically, if you're launching a new fintech and you're also in the middle of a pandemic, we started to see the stresses in the business on digital identity proofing. And what we did see in the industry was challenges around proving that in a digital environment that Marianne Miller was at the other end of an interaction presenting Marianne Miller's identity information. And when I talk about identity information, I'm really talking about that information that helps you comply with the customer information program. And what that kind of data is Marianne's name, her social security number, her date of birth and address. So what happened is we started to see both in public and private sector the erosion of that ability to be able to tell that Marianne was at the other end of that interaction. Certainly also what we saw was the bad actors step up their game. And certainly the attack rate on financial institutions as well as fintechs increased quite a bit during the pandemic. We saw, lots of PPP fraud, unemployment insurance fraud. More recently, we're seeing an increase in disability claim fraud. So that type of fraud was actually being perpetrated in mass scale by very sophisticated organized criminals. And that's also provided, lots of challenges in that arena. What that really did, Yuka, and I found this very interesting. It brought together stakeholders within the organization that normally sit in silos. No one really. What I found was the challenge was no one was stepping up and really owning customer identity. So you have the cybersecurity team over here managing access management. You have the authentication team managing authentication and the authentication during each event. And then you have the fraud team over here managing fraud. But when you really bring, and then you even have the BSA AML officers owning the customer information program and the compliance aspects of KYC. But you had to bring all of those four parties together to really understand what was broken in identity proofing. And that's where it became an opportunity, I think, for businesses, but also very challenging to bring those stakeholders together and get them all on the same page that there wasn't a digital identity problem.
Thanks for sharing that, Marianne. And maybe we can delve a little bit more into some solutions that can solve some of that a little later on. And Tim, would love to get your perspective on this as well. I know you work with fintechs, banks, other service providers on a daily basis. What challenges are you hearing out there?
I would probably echo a lot of the same things that Mariana said. I mean, I think of three very distinct challenges that our customers have run into. Things like how do we drive safe and sustainable growth? I think that's a question that we hear a lot. And I know from our KYC checks as part of our solutions, we've in some of the conversations we've been having as we've been going out and talking to potential customers about them, they're seeing very high false positive hit rates. And so when we are able to go in and provide solutions, we can actually drive that down quite substantially. And the net result there is that we enable that customer to drive more revenue to the top of their funnel. And that drives sustainable growth. I think that's a big thing that we've hearing challenges about. Challenge two, how can firms stay ahead of the game when it comes to AML and reputational risks? I think this is a great question that we field a lot. We'll talk a lot about how KYC is really, in some ways checking the box on just requirements that a company will have, or a bank or fintech will have. But being able to stay ahead of the fraud and challenges in those marketplaces by not only getting KYC data, but having data that's living and breathing and staying very current and providing consistent updates to. Those are things that we being a lot more proactive rather than reactive to issues that they run into. No onboard. Challenge three, I would say, and this is not just in the fintech world. I think it's very applicable to any customers in the identity space, is that no onboarding flow or process is the same. So really, how do you build a solution from APIs, RESTful APIs, user experience that can really drive down user friction while also improving performance, detection, fraud, and that kind of thing. I think that sometimes user experience gets is an afterthought, but you really you have to think through what's going on as far as what your customers are expecting, what their experiences are going to be, and I think it loops back up to challenge one, which is talking about sustainable growth. I mean, you want your customers to be successful. You don't want dropout rates to be sky high. I would say too, fintechs and crypto exchanges, as they look to scale safely and efficiently, with using real-time risk databases and things like that, we're the idea is really to be about capturing bad actors, trusting, doing trust positive, true positive and true matches, while also reducing false positives. And creating that fast lane for good customers while also diverting bad customers away. I mean, some of the things that some of our solutions that we'll talk about, I think later on, some of the net results that we've seen is that as people who've they go through our process and our solutions, the bad actors are actually opting out. So you'll see a drop down of people who are opting, or you'll see a drop in people opting out. And you'll really find in that group of opting out, that'll be people who are bad actors. And so it helps drive down fraud. You can focus on that group instead of the larger group that's being proofed through. They're being proactive to KYC, ongoing monitoring, allowing firms to stay ahead of the game, focusing on AML and reputational risk we've talked about. evaluating that a customer's reputational risk, not just from a client's perspective, but also from a transactional perspective. And certainly exchanges definitely face their own set of challenges. Going back to no onboarding process is the same, let alone for exchanges. There are different flows. You're looking at different thresholds. You're looking at different jurisdictions. Maybe it's different here in the U.S. It's as it is in the UK or things like that. You have transactional sensitivity and stuff like that.
Thanks so much, Tim. And Marianne, I know you've been also leading some industry identity and fraud industry roundtables around this. Any additional insights coming out of those?
Yeah, so there's been some really interesting discussions, and some of those discussions are really surrounding around some of the operational impacts that we're seeing with all the identity theft attacks. And some of those impacts are, I'll go back to some of the things that Tim said around KYC. So if you really look at a true onboarding process, and you look at the fact that you're bringing this digital customer into your environment, but let's just say it's a bad actor and they've opened up an account, and under someone else's name, they've actually managed to conduct money laundering. They actually managed to conduct a check fraud or ACH fraud, or deposit funds and then later dispute them as a false dispute claim. All of these type of activity can be conducted under someone else's name. So what happens is in those flows, especially when it comes to money laundering, if you don't get identity right, you could attribute the wrong person to a SAR, for example. And that's an ongoing discussion that's very important. So how do you, and then you're churning with your internal compliance and AML teams with conducting investigations on someone that is inappropriate. It's actually the victim that you're conducting an investigation on. So that's an important discussion that's occurring in around these roundtables. Other important discussions is we talk about some of the threats that are out there, and we're seeing threats around bot attacks. So these are, automated scripted account onboarding attempts that are coming from, lots of different places that really wreak havoc within your organization. That, you can start to see these, your cyber teams normally start to see these first. They start to see these as almost like a DDoS attack on your bank or your financial institution or your fintech, where there's actually attempts to open up accounts in a very rapid mode. And some of those other discussions really go around what are the solutions that we can use to really start to look at. We've done our risk assessments. We know where our gaps are. What are the layers of security? What are the layers of identity proofing? What do we need to do to reimagine onboarding to make it, to Tim's point, safe and secure when you bring on your customers, so that you can grow safely. So we've had some very robust discussions around, again, threats, solutions, and how to even look at onboarding in a different way.
Thanks, Marianne. And yeah, I think some of the things that you brought up, the new fraud trends, might be fodder for additional webinars. So definitely, if anybody on the line would like to hear more about that, please stay tuned, because I think we'll be having some more webinars and conversations around those specific attacks that Marianne mentioned. All right, so now we've heard from Marianne and Tim about their own experiences, but we'd love to hear from you as well and make this a little bit more interactive. So on the next screen, we've got a poll question, which I think we can pop up soon, hopefully to everybody. Yes, you should be seeing a pop-up now. So I'll give everybody about 60 seconds to answer this question. We'd love to have your participation. And the question is, what is your top challenge when it comes to KYC and identity proofing? So I'll give everybody just about 30 more seconds to get their answers in here, and then we can look at the results. Interesting. It looks like, wow, 35%. So this is the most people said, 35% that it's hard to prove the identity of the actual person behind the transaction. So that's interesting. That was the top response. Then the second top response was confusing and cumbersome verification flows. 24% of you said that confusing and cumbersome verification flows were your top challenge when it comes to KYC. And then the third, fourth, and fifth were kind of tied between it being costly, fraud issues, and then watch list screening false positives. So maybe I'll kick this over to you, Marianne. Do you feel that these responses are surprising, or are these somewhat expected?
No, in fact, I find these very in line with what the industry is experiencing, and what we just talked about is, again, proving that Marianne's presenting her own information in the flow is absolutely, and this kind of resonates with many different industries. It's definitely affecting state and government, public sector, our public sector, but it's affecting fintechs, it's affecting banks, it's affecting healthcare and insurance companies. So lots of different, and lenders as well. So lots of different verticals are experiencing that particular problem. If you have that problem at the onset, then I can see where it affects fraud, it affects watch list screening, false positives. It also can create very cumbersome flows if you're trying to plug the gap but not thinking about the end-to-end customer experience in that process. Then you start to maybe overreact to some of the fraud issues and not really think about, how do I cohesively blend the customer experience with strength of security in the same flow? So that's a really important question to ask yourself, and businesses to ask themselves when they're actually improving the question of identity proofing, and knowing and understanding the person behind the transaction.
Thanks, Marianne, and love to hear your perspective on this as well, Tim. Was this kind of what you were expecting in terms of top challenges, or is this surprising to you?
It really is. I mean, Marianne did a great job kind of going through, the top trends that she's seen, but, focusing on the two that seem to have attracted the most attention here, the hard to prove identity of an actual person and confusing and cumbersome verification flows. I mean, that is consistent across every industry, every vertical that that identity is important in, right? I think, having come from a very civil identity focused world in my past, I certainly have seen that from, introducing, document scanning and things like that into online flows to try to prove somebody's identity with liveness. It can be cumbersome. It can be, difficult to do. It's prone to fraud, things like that. Make it very challenging to actually prove, that, the old 90s cartoon about identity, or about, nobody on the internet knows you're a dog, right? So, getting, pointing out or trying to prove that the person on the other side of the computer is a dog is like, that's the big challenge that exists today in today's world. And it's one of the reasons why, the White House is, there's executive orders talking about, the importance of digital identity. I think it's been at the top of the last several administrations, looking at it and going, this is a serious problem. How do we protect our infrastructure? How do we protect, our private businesses? How do you ensure you have identity right? So it's not surprising at all.
Yeah. And Tim, I'd just like to add on to your last point about, the focus from the White House. It was just announced yesterday that the Treasury Assistant Secretary for 2022, it's going to be the year of action on digital identity. Right. So that was just announced yesterday. And in fact, there's going to be some voluntary grants to the states to start to help clean up some of these identity proofing issues that, again, if it starts in public sector, it kind of, extends itself into the private sector as well. So that you're absolutely right. I think that the industry as a whole has understood that there's a big problem.
Thanks, Marianne, and thanks, Tim. And I just realized the audience members may not be able to see the results of the poll, so we can certainly share those with you when we send out the video, if you're interested in what your peers have said. All right, so now we've spoken about some of the challenges, and we've seen what some of the top of mind issues are. So now let's talk about 2022 trends. So Marianne, maybe can you outline some of the trends that you're seeing when it comes to upgraded KYC and identity proofing?
Yes, so some of the trends I am seeing, and this is, with many conversations, and part of the reason I'm here at Prove was I found this to be a big problem in the industry, and I thought we need to solve the ability to identity proof, and we also need to solve the customer experience. And so many of my conversations are around that particular topic. And I think there was an assumption that those two things are mutually exclusive. And often the teams that manage that, the growth teams or the teams that are managing the digital experience, are not talking to their authentication and identity and fraud counterparts. So what's great about it is bringing, the conversations that I'm having are bringing all those stakeholders together and say, how can we solve both problems? And what's really great about those conversations is what I call the reimagining onboarding conversation is how can we change our look and feel on the app? How can we make it better? How can we make it more modern? How can we make it more appealing at the same time while we're improving our security in the background? And that's definitely a conversation that's occurring quite a bit. And it's different for each type of business, whether you're launching a lending product, or whether you're, onboarding more customers into your fintech, or you're looking at even high-risk transactions after the subsequent onboarding. Those conversations are all really important, and all the conversations that we're having, again, back to Tim's point, is I've got to know who's behind that interaction. And so those are some of the conversations I'm having. I'm also seeing customers look at what I call the total cost of ownership. So they're really looking at, how do I optimize that end-to-end process? A lot of the processes today are really just focused around that KYC SIP, customer information program checkbox. So checking that the information provided in the flow is Marianne's name, social, date of birth, and address. And as we know, that's all available in the data breaches. But really what we're looking at is saying, how can I bring my technology and my customer journey stacked together where it makes sense and the flows happen quickly, they happen in real time? We want to go from just a few minutes between the time the customer starts that application to the point that you can offer them products and services and welcome them into your environment. So those are really important conversations that I've been having.
Thanks so much, Marianne. And Tim, with businesses taking a fresh look at their onboarding practices, can you share some principles that can help guide them?
Sure. I think, obviously we're talking about KYC. So it's, you really want the most accurate consumer identity data that's available. Ideally that data has a rich history of activity and can really deliver high risk or real-time risk assessments to make those most accurate decisions possible. So it's not just about going out and checking a CRA or an authoritative source. It's really, how do I build out a data set that is continuously evolving, continuously assessing that risk. I think, as Marianne's pointed out, and we're really kind of getting at, there's ensuring that the onboarding experience is top notch. But I would also say that, this may seem like a layup, or it's durable and omni-channel. What I mean by that is that, it persists across multiple life cycle events, but really across channels too. So if you're talking about, users are on mobile devices, they're also on desktops or on tablets, they're engaging with your sites and your accounts across these different channels, and really being able to take advantage of that identity being durable across those channels is really one of the principles that we look for too. It all points to smooth onboarding experience, making it easier for customers to participate in your ecosystem, to log into your accounts, but also be proofed, and do so with without while combating fraud and also encouraging the good actors to be successful with as little friction as possible.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, Tim, to your durability conversation point. I think it's a great point. And, part of this is if you're doing better identity proofing at the beginning of your flow, then you send less people to global sanctions and to PEP and to watch lists. And that's really, you're really looking at how do I really look at my flow, my journey, but also how are you weeding out the bad actors early on in that life cycle so that you reduce your costs ongoing. And then also, how do you blend, and which is refreshing, and not all organizations are doing. How do I blend my identity proofing processes and my sanctions, my PEP checks, my watch list checks in the same flow? And often, they're done in the same flow, but not intentionally and cohesively and with a durable in a durable fashion. So I think this is really where the future lies, that we're really changing the definition of what KYC means. And I think that's really foundationally where we're at.
Yeah, and Tim, maybe in order to make this a little easier for everyone on the call to visualize, from a customer experience perspective, can you walk us through what a modern or ideal onboarding experience, the smooth onboarding experience that we're talking about, would look like with some of these newer technologies enabled?
For sure. We've put together a mock-up here of, a faster and a simplified onboarding experience that ties out a KYC at the end. What we're really looking at here on the first screen is essentially once the user arrives on their mobile device to your bank or your fintech, we're conducting an eligibility, or potentially you're conducting an eligibility check to make sure that there's enough consumer data available, but you're also looking for signals from the device itself. Has this phone been, has there been a SIM swap on this device? Is this phone, the reputation of this phone, as we like to call it, is it high enough to be able to go through and do these, do this process and really does that phone tie back to the ownership of, to the person that, or is it a reliable ownership here? So it's really establishing eligibility. The second set, this is your traditional transparent consumer consent-driven flow where you're collecting, in this case, a month and day, minimal information from the end user to reduce the friction for them. That gets sent off to an authenticated KYC compliant database, tying together the device information along with the minimal information that we've collected, returning back a prefilled a data form that includes the information on the individual that's logging in. And then just like that, you've got a person who's been successfully onboarded via mobile, who's also gone through KYC process. So this kind of modern flow, new customers, what we've seen internally, or we've seen with our customers, we typically see 79, 80% faster, and typically in 10 seconds or less to get through this flow, as opposed to 45 seconds to a minute, or that typical high friction KYC approaches invoke. And I think that's a great segue. If next slide. So obviously, this was a tee up for me to talk about PreFill. We offer a product called PreFill, and this is a solution that Proof puts together that is a one-stop onboarding solution that includes the no-cost KYC aspects of it. It's really designed to, autofill applications, bring bank-grade KYC compliant data from authoritative sources, tie that to M&O data and additional checks that we do, tying to the device and the trustworthiness of the device. We're authenticating consumers to really drive down and thwart the typical account opening frauds that we see. Just a quick hit here, 70% average reduction in false positives, which is pretty substantial. And it comes back with the KYC, we use the KYC is at no additional cost. That includes global sanctions, watch list, PEP checks. And at the end of it, you have autofilled data. That's why it's called prefill. So it's KYC to autofill data that can be used to pre-populate into an account and set the account up.
Yeah. And I'd like to add a few other things, just from my own experience and, as a fraud strategist when looking at this flow, Tim, in the past. So if you start to look at, a flow like this, you could actually go to your existing onboarding flow and count how many screens does my customer need to visit? How many buttons do they need to push? How much information do they need to type? And if you really dig down to that and really look at, it's kind of like a Six Sigma kind of, process flow, and then you re-look at it with fresh eyes, you can really look at how you can affect the customer experience in a positive way if you go through this flow. Another really important aspect is these identity checks are so strong that at the time, once the customer is approved for the application, you can begin to do a few other things. So a few other things that you can do is you can automatically offer them products. So let's say you have a debit card, or let's say you even have some kind of product that you'd like to offer in the acclamation flow for your customer. You can say, here, I have a virtual debit card. Here's your debit card in the app that you can actually use immediately before your physical card arrives, because of the fact that you've already done your identity proofing. You already know that this is Marianne Miller and that acclamation flow. Additionally, for those who are watching who are cybersecurity or authentication specialists, this check can actually help you avoid a registration flow for binding your device. This information is strong enough to bind that device to that customer record, so you can automatically start to understand that this is Marianne's device in your organization. So there's so many positive outcomes of really understanding identity from the beginning.
Definitely.
Yeah, it does.
I think Tim does have one more slide talking about some of those results. Is that right?
I do. I was just going to say, Marianne's spot on. This opens up a ton of use cases, from anything from enterprise authentication through, credit card applications, and really just all about delighting your customers and delivering value. But as you can see, so we've pulled together some results from our customers who are using PreFill actively in the field. Low friction has and ease of use has driven about a 35% reduction in onboarding abandonment. That's pretty substantial. More people coming in, more credit cards you can offer, more people are signing up. Seeing a substantial decrease in onboarding time. As I mentioned earlier, we're going from 47 seconds down to 10 seconds on average. It's almost an 80% decrease. That's pretty incredible. Our auto approvals are up almost 29%, going from something like 73 to 94%. We've got a lot of customers who are saying yes to PreFill, and a big part of that is because of the user experience, as Marianne was pointing out. You're reducing the number of screens that they have to interact with. You're providing them with a service that eases their onboarding, makes it delightful to work with. And as we're doing that, I mentioned this earlier. Because a lot of the bad actors are choosing not to PreFill, we're seeing a substantial drop in fraud. Not just because of the fact that they're choosing it, but also because of the identity verification services that we're doing behind the scenes. But what we're finding is that the fraudsters are choosing not to PreFill, and which basically directs them into a funnel that's a little bit easier. It becomes easier to manage, and you can really focus your fraud services on evaluating those transactions that are coming in. Ones that aren't being PreFilled, okay, let's take a longer look at those to see if there's a substantial amount of fraud in that. So it acts as almost as a deterrent. Marianne, did you have anything you'd like to add into that?
Yeah, and that's a critical part of, again, when you look at kind of taking a fresh set of eyes around your onboarding risk kind of evaluations, you can put more of those fraud checks right up front. That definitely reduces your operational impact. I'll give you an example. Sometimes in PreFill, the customer's legal name is confirmed, their address, their social security number, and their date of birth. But let's just say I just moved last week, and maybe that you don't have my current address. And that's a common thing that happens maybe in a pre-fill flow or a flow, an onboarding flow. But what happens is in current processes today, you're going through the process of remedying an address for lots of fraud attacks. And that's very expensive to your business. But if you're going through the pre-fill flow with Proof, you know that it's Marianne on the other end of that interaction. So it's worth the cost and expense of remedying and obtaining the information you need to get her correct address and to get her on her way for her account, because you know that you're correcting an account, you're remediating Marianne Miller's application. And that reduction in operational effort, not only from the remediation that might come from the output of a fraud attack, but the actual focusing on helping good customers and keeping bad actors out is critically important in that consideration of those flows.
Thanks, Marianne, for those insights. Yeah, so now we are curious to hear from the audience, which of these identity trends or innovations would benefit your initiatives the most? So again, I'll give everybody about 60 seconds to answer, and then we can share out the results with you as well. All right, so it looks like there was a tie. The top two choices were verifying the person behind the transaction at 29%, which makes sense because we saw in our first poll that that was the biggest challenge. And then reducing fraud and false positives was also 29%. And then coming in third place, KYC at no additional cost. So maybe Tim, we'll start with you this time. If any of these answers are surprising, or was this kind of what you expected as well?
I actually thought everybody would jump at free, right? So KYC at no additional cost. No. Again, I think this lines up, right? The solving the identity equation online is paramount, and not just in KYC, but across all the anywhere you're using username and password to log in, and you're conducting sensitive transactions that require security. Identity has to be first and foremost on your mind. So I think that totally makes sense, as does reducing fraud. They go hand in hand. If you're accurately verifying the person behind the transaction, you're reducing fraud. And on top of that, if you're doing it well, you're driving down false positives. You're not labeling your trusted customers as fraudsters.
Marianne, was this along the lines of what you were thinking as well? Yes, it is. It's along the lines of my industry interactions, my daily conversations with people in the industry around the challenges. And I can just speak to some of these challenges. I've spoken to some financial institutions later that their attack rate is so high that they might be pausing some of their onboarding processes just so they can get a grip and plug some holes, because of the fact that these attack rates are so high and that these challenges are so substantial. So I'm not surprised to see, this is consistent again with the industry and what I'm hearing. So I really feel like now's the time really to begin to start to communicate with your C-level, communicate with your greater stakeholders what the problem is, and start to identify and risk assess all of your processes, all of your onboarding processes for all of your lines of business, and really look at what you can do to improve all along the lines of reducing fraud and understanding identity proofing. It's affecting, one of the topics that I like to talk about, which is an interesting discussion that I have with the industry, is if someone goes to a financial institution, for example, and opens up a credit card under my name, I eventually see that there's been an inquiry to the credit bureau, and I eventually see possibly that trade line opened up on my credit bureau. So as a consumer, I have a way to remedy that. I can go and I can call the credit bureau and I can, say, dispute that as identity theft. I can call that organization and I can have that, credit card shut down. I can also call the identity theft center and report myself as a victim of identity theft. These things are all very doable in a lending environment. But what we have today is we have a lot of new businesses and fintechs that are opening up, non-lending products. And if my name, that we don't have the concept of a deposit bureau. So if my name as a consumer is used to actually open up these types of accounts, I may never know that my name was used for money laundering or for HCH fraud or for, check fraud. So that's really a concern of the industry because of the fact that, it's a broader discussion around, protecting their business, protecting, their customers, but also protecting consumers at large as well. So this is definitely in line with those conversations that I'm having.
Thanks, Marianne. And if we go to the next slide, if you've been to any of our other webinars, you know that we usually like to end with a recap, some takeaways for everybody that are actually actionable. So Marianne, maybe you can walk us through some of the actionable takeaways for our audience today before we jump into our Q&A.
I'd love to do that, Yuka. So the first actionable insight is really convert with confidence. And what we mean by convert with confidence is this back to, the topic that's been number one for the audience here and something that Tim and I have discussed is, identity proofing that customer and understand that we are onboarding a customer that's going to enjoy your products and services that you're offering, but you actually know that it is the real person that's you're onboarding and not an identity theft victim. Consolidating your vendors and reducing your costs with KYC. Again, bringing your identity proofing, your authentication, your identity, your digital identity, and your KYC, your SIP validation processes, your sanctions checking, your PEP checking, and your watch list screening all together in one cohesive flow, one cohesive check. And doing that in real time and doing that in seconds is really important, but also reducing that cost. Again, free KYC with identity proofing and authentication. Understanding that you're verifying the actual person behind the device. That was the number one pain point that we saw on the webinar today. And that's the number one problem that Proof is out to solve. And we're here to partner and we understand that challenge in the industry. Using the phone as that omni-channel authenticator. Again, we're not just looking at interactions on a mobile device. We're not just looking at interactions on the web. Consumers come from all different places. They come from gaming consoles. They come from, iPads. There's all kinds of ways that you can interact. And I'm sure by next week, there'll be a new way that you can interact, a new kind of device. So, omni-channel authenticators are certainly very important. And lastly, but most, really importantly, that, how can I as a security professional, how can I as a fraud professional approach my business partners and say, hey, what if I told you I can improve the customer experience, reduce your costs, but also add strength to security? I think that's a great conversation to have with your business.
Absolutely. Tim, any final tips or insights before we jump into our Q&A?
Being sensitive to the time, I'll keep it brief. I would just reiterate that, when you're choosing a KYC solution, you aren't simply just checking a compliance box. We've said that a couple of times today. You really look for solutions that, drive your customer satisfaction through a low friction user experience while delivering value and reducing fraud and providing that KYC compliance that you need. So it's sort of a wrap up of everything that Marianne just went through and described.
Thanks so much, Tim. All right, I think we can get started with our Q&A right on time. So the first question is, does the PreFill solution actually verify the identity of the applicant, or is it just autofilling their information? So Marianne, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, so That's a pointed question and a really good question. It actually does identity proofing at the same time. So we are one layer of that identity proofing. We're using signals that come from lots of different sources that help conduct that identity proofing. So in other words, we conduct what we call a possession check, but that possession check is actually looking at interacting with this, I'll call it the cell phone tower, because that's a simple way of putting it. It's interacting with that tower to understand that Mary Ann's device that we know she owns, we know it has a good reputation behind it, is actually the person that's interacting with you in that particular interaction. So that's an important part of what I call the identity proofing process. So the answer to that question is yes. That's what we're doing, and we can prove here. Tim and his team can take you through. We can go through, and our data science team go through a more technical explanation of that process. But that is what we do here at Prove.
Great. And then another question we've gotten: does the no-cost KYC solution only work if the consumer is applying on their phone? What if they're applying on a desktop or tablet? Tim, would you like to take that one?
So yeah, sure. I mean, if you recall earlier in our presentation, I talked about omni-channel and durability as one of the guiding principles in user experience. While obviously a majority of people are getting more and more comfortable interacting with sites and accounts and things like that from their mobile phone, I log into my bank account 5 times a day or whatever it is on my desktop. I also have a tablet, so I'm connecting through that as well. I think the important thing is to look at how you can leverage your mobile phone as part of that omnichannel experience. And so we do things like, push a text message or what we call an instant link to your mobile device. If you're on your desktop, you're logging in, we'll say, okay, there might be an additional step that says provide your mobile phone number. We'll text a link to you that by clicking on that, it helps derive that intelligence, that identity intelligence from the mobile device, and then can be reflected back to your desktop application. The same goes for your tablet. And while your tablet, we can also pull data about. So I think omni-channel going across those multiple channels, easily supported with a phone-centric approach to identity and identity verification.
Thanks, Tim. And Mary Ann, this question is for you. Which KYC checks are actually no cost?
So the KYC checks that are actually no cost are the ones that organizations typically do. So that's global sanctions. So that's an important part of your compliance, watch list screening, and also your PEP checks, which are politically exposed people. So those are the checks that are free and on the flow.
Thanks, Mary Ann. And I'm actually seeing quite a few questions here, very specific questions related to pricing. So we typically would save pricing for some more private conversations. So if you do have a question about pricing, feel free to email me. We can pop up my email on the screen. I think it's on the last slide of the deck. It's yuka.yoneda@prove.com, and I can reply with more information, specific information about pricing. Another question for Mary Ann: have you seen more regulatory pressure post-pandemic around ensuring that identity and KYC challenges are being addressed?
So I think that's an important question, Yuka. I think I haven't seen pressure, but I have seen attention, and I think that attention may turn into pressure. And I'll give you an example. The FDIC and FinCEN just recently announced that they are going to entertain a digital identity tech sprint in Washington, D.C., which is refreshing to see the regulators getting involved and actually hosting tech sprints and taking an interest in this topic. So I think, out of those kinds of conversations, they might actually, understand those challenges as well as we do as practitioners. And then again, we saw more recently, again, the announcement by the Treasury Assistant Secretary yesterday, again on digital identity action year of 2022. We're starting to see more and more conversations around identity. And I think as an industry, we're doing a good job of what I call, bubbling this up and understanding. I think certainly, it's very obvious in the media every day. I don't go, 10 minutes before I get a text message of another new, someone in my network, telling me about another arrest of a PPP fraud and a digital identity fraud. It's hitting the media every day. So obviously, the billions that were stolen are a concern, because that's a cost, not only to all of us as taxpayers, but it's a cost to our government as well. So I think that this topic is definitely becoming probably the hottest topic in fraud right now. And I think the regulators, I don't know if there'll be any new regulation outcomes because of this, but I do know that as an industry, we can actually take those first steps of leading the improvements in identity proofing rather than waiting for the regulations to come.
Definitely, Marianne. And I'm also seeing some comments just related to what you just said, as well as some of your previous comments on cyber attacks and onboarding being very fruitful. Would love to hear more about it. So just want to let the audience know, like, we see your comments, and we're creating content almost every day on proof.com, videos with Marianne and other SMEs at Proof related to this, as well as blog posts. So if you're interested in these topics, please check on proof.com, because we do have some very relevant content there. And we're listening to your comments, and we'll definitely be creating other content as well, such as webinars addressing some of these topics. Another question for Tim: what happens when the DOB doesn't match the device?
So I think this is a probably a little bit, there's probably a little bit more of a deeper dive to get into with this, but because I think there are two parts to this question. One is, what happens if the DOB comes back and it's not edited, it doesn't match what's supposed to be. I don't think that's the question here. I think the question is, how do we, if we use DOB to establish the identity of the individual from the device? The simple answer is it's not really a factor into what we call pro or possession, reputation, and ownership checks that derive that basically provide the information about the identity. Our possession checks are really focused on authenticating the user, confirming that the user has physical possession of the device, that we know that it's that person. It's not sitting out in a different country than we'd expect, or in a different location. Reputation, these are things about the device that we would expect to, that we would see signals about the mobile device, the phone number, where the disconnects, have you changed, carriers, that type of information. That factors into reputation. And then the ownership aspect of it is, does this consumer even own that phone number? All those things factor into it. So DOB doesn't necessarily have an impact on deriving whether that doesn't match the device per se. It is just some of the information that we pull back as part of the KYC check, and we pre-fill.
Thanks, Tim. And another question for you. I've heard Prove only wants to work with major institutions and has a high minimum volume, placing your service out of reach for community banks just getting started in the space. Is this true?
So I'll put my sales hat on. I'd say no. We'll have somebody reach out to you and talk to you about that. I think that's we're happy to work with you in the sizes that you need. I don't believe I've seen anything come through. From my perspective, from the product side, that would indicate this. So we'll have somebody reach out to you, Hugh, and talk you through some of these pricing concerns.
Great. And another question for you, Tim. This is about PreFill. Does it leverage only telecom data signals, or also signals from the mobile device itself? What is considered a satisfactory proofin check before data is released or pre-filled? And this is a long question. Also, where does pre-filled data come from? M&O?
No, so we use multiple authoritative sources. I think the short answer is the pre-filled data is actually coming from a variety of KYC compliant sources. The M&O data is helping us establish, is things that we've seen that help us establish that that Tim is indeed holding his phone. It's where we expect it to be, that we trust the phone that he's on. So really that's the identity, the identity verification piece, to make sure that when we're requesting Tim's information, that it's Tim holding the phone. We do leverage signals from the mobile device. There, as part of the authentication and proof of possession, we have a variety of different authenticators that we can bring to bear. We call that proof auth as part of our solutions that we offer. There are a number of things that we can do, and it really can be tailored to the use case and to the sensitivity and risk of the transaction.
Thanks, Tim. And I'm also getting some other questions and comments about Marianne's previous comments about cyber attacks and onboarding, and that people want to hear more about it. So again, just want to let you know that, we will definitely plan to host another webinar regarding that, because it does seem like we're getting a lot of interest there. All right, well, it looks like our time together is coming to an end. So I'd love to thank, actually, it looks like we have one more question. Does Prove, Marianne, maybe this question can be for you. Does Prove handle OFAC compliance?
So OFAC, yes, we do. So that would be part of our, all of the comprehensive sanction checks, watch list screening, and PEP. So yes, that's correct, we do. And that's part of what's free. Yeah.
All right, so it looks like our time together is coming to an end. I want to thank our experts, Tim Brown and Marianne Miller, for being on the line with us, sharing their insights. And thank you so much to everyone who joined. If you have additional questions, please feel free to email me, yuka.yoneda@prove.com, and we will get those questions answered for you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for joining.